Part 2, motherfuckers. Welcome back to part 2. Um, it's funny because I just absolutely lost what I was talking about, even though there has been absolutely no cut in the actual footage. I know it's now part 2 and it's released later, but looks like my brain just cut in half and doesn't remember what I was talking about a minute ago in part 1, basically. So it will come back, don't worry. I just have to stop talking for like 30 seconds and get my thoughts right. So no talking for the next 30 seconds. I will come back to you when my thoughts are okay. Hopefully something good will happen at the tables because I have a hard time getting back my idea. It's gonna come back, don't worry. Please, something happen. Someone do something. Getting better, recovering from downswing, being modest, being honest about your game, having self-confidence that what you do is right, that kind of stuff. Not bluffing enough for most people. Yeah, I got it. I got it. I got the other thing basically, the other big theme that I wanted to talk about. Uh, for the rest of the video, I'm just gonna play that hand, look a bit at my opponent's stack. Fold to C bet of 38 definitely tells me that he's not folding a lot. Obviously, his range are going to be pretty strong, but he's probably calling at least twice with like a pair below the queen, something like 9s, 8s, 10s, jacks. This is definitely a good board for that. So I want to bet the flop on the turn. Probably want to bet again. I think I get 2 streets of value more often that way than by like checking the turn and then reevaluating. I think he's still calling with like 7s to jacks pretty often here. River is not a great card, obviously. You could have 4s very well as well. Could have something else. I think this is definitely a case of trying to check down my hand. No merits in trying to turn my hand to a bluff here. And if he bets, I don't think I can do anything. Kind of sucks, obviously. Betting flop and turn is better if I'm better kicked because of all those situations where he's having a queen himself and I'm out kicked pretty much in every single one of those situations. But still, I feel like betting flop and turn are right. But yeah, coming back on the big idea that I wanted to talk about for part 2 basically is how I think, as a general, I talked about a bit in part 1, how most players I think that are stuck at mid stakes and small stakes first are not, don't bluff enough, are not creative enough, just are so afraid of making moves that they don't even try them. So by not trying them, they never get better, basically, which is something you definitely want to look into. But I think the other single biggest, most common leak of even players up to 5-10 and even 10-20 is not adjusting to your opponents. This is the very biggest thing. I mean, when you start in your poker career to understand stuff, you build yourself like a quote unquote solid game that you can always rely on, and you feel like, okay, this spot I'm calling 2 barrels and I'm most often folding the river with, and this spot I have a big draw. With my big draw, I usually raise the flop. Sometimes I'm gonna flat, but with no real reason and stuff like that. And I feel like what separates the very best players from the okay players is the ability to adapt to your opponents. And to be able to adapt to your opponents, you definitely need to work hard on your game. And you need to, like I was talking about at part 1, when you try to get better and you try to review what you are doing wrong yourself and why some people are exploiting you, or why some people are giving you so much trouble, the very best players you're playing against day in and day out. You need at some point to try and mimic what they are doing. Try to imitate that. If it's not players at your stakes, watch bigger games. Try to get some hand stories from bigger games, some big heads-up battles between Dur and Jungleman, or some big, I don't know, anything at like 25-50 and up. Look at games, look how it is played, and look how people have different gears and can adapt differently to their opponents. And the bottom line is, like I said, most players that have trouble moving up are just not good at the adapting part of poker, which is the single biggest part that you have to be good at if you want to be successful against thinking players and against good players. Because at some point you have to kind of differentiate in your mind like a couple of games. I mean, myself, I do have a game that I can rely on against fish, and my game that I can rely on against a regular are two totally different things, two totally opposite things. And of course, it's gonna vary from fish to fish and from regular to regular. But just as a whole, in general, it is going to be very, very just those two things are going to be very, very different, probably more than different than most people I'm playing against. And you have to understand that there's a reason for that. And when you stop and start thinking about it, what are those reasons for that? Is that, well, trying to give you like a quick list of reasons why you don't play the same way you do against a good player than you do against a bad player. Is first, against a bad player, you don't have to worry about representing stuff most of the time. You just have to read your opponent's cards the best way possible and then logically decide on the best action according to his two cards. This is pretty much it. It pretty much stops there most of the time. And as long as your hand reading is good, you won't have any problem with that. But as you play with better opponents, and as you move up in stakes, and as you maybe start having trouble being successful at higher stakes, basically because you run into better players, you have to realize that only reading your opponent's cards is not going to be enough. You have to read what your opponents think of you, what they see about your game, what you've shown at Showdown, what you are giving, what you look like you're giving in your game. That could look like weaknesses. What are your weaknesses? Are they exploiting that? Do they have weaknesses that I can exploit? And etc., etc. And the more of those questions you ask yourself, and the more you do the exercise against the more regulars, basically, the better you will get. It's as simple as that, and you will get a big edge on those regulars. And it's not just about like having a game against regulars of, okay, this game is not too exploitable. Being afraid of not getting exploited is something that there's a difference. I mean, there's a very big difference between being afraid of getting exploited and being honest about realizing when you are getting exploited. And if you approach the whole balancing range and all of that kind of stuff with fear in your head, with fear of not being balanced and having to find balance on every single street right off the bat, basically, and telling yourself, okay, like, I cannot make that play here because I'm not balanced. I absolutely have to be balanced and stuff. If you approach that whole process that way, because this is one of the biggest processes that you have to start applying if you start moving up higher stakes, 5, 10 and up, because if you're not too well balanced in most spots, you will get exploited. But if you approach it with fear of not being exploited, it kind of comes back to my like fear theory video I was talking about in my 5-10 playing your A game video, you're getting nowhere basically. You are absolutely going nowhere. I'm not talking about ends because I think everything I've played so far has been pretty standard. Let's check back that. And I am going to check back that as well. I could try a bluff here, because I feel like he got there with a 10 or a jack pretty often on the river with his timing and stuff. But I'm not sure if he's folding those, because I'm not representing much by checking back the turn and the betting. And I am good from time to time, of course. Yeah, I felt like he had a 10 or something like that quite pretty often, but like I said, I don't think I'm representing enough that would call the flop and then bet the river for value. I think I am going to get hero called pretty often. I could still represent something like Queen Jack, but Queen Jack is most likely to bet the turn. So, and I think from what I know, this guy is at least a decent end reader, and I think he would have found a call, maybe not with King 10, he would probably have found a call with a Jack, just because the Jack is a bit better and people tend to like approach their decision making kind of that way because they just dump the 10 because they don't even think about calling often. He has been playing tighter than I expected. I forgot to look at the stats. He did like, I think I can click it back profitably for what it's worth here. He did 4-bet me pretty quick, and I do have an ace blocker, and I can 4-bet fold here. I feel like he's been, from what I've seen, he's been 4-betting a lot, and I feel like he's 4-bet folding quite a lot, especially with the timing he put, timing plus sizing that he gave me, and I don't think he's ever coming back over the top with bluff here. He's gonna be too afraid of me having kings, aces, or trying to make him brain fart with something else. So I felt like I could click it back 5-bet bluff here with the timing and the sizing, and from what I've seen from that opponent so far, just general feeling basically, and I ended up being right, which is cool. I don't want to risk too much on that feeling, but since I felt like he was never bluffing over that, it definitely clicking it back and then folding was definitely better than shoving. And I don't get any action on my aces, which suck. Coming back on the fear of not being balanced, basically, it is not the right way to approach it. You don't want to approach a whole getting better and balancing your ranges and reading people process with any sort of fear. You have to be confident, and you have to tell yourself, okay, I'm going to play my best on every single hand, and I'm going to make some experiments, and I'm going to try some big bluffs, even though they don't look really balanced. I'm going to try all those things, and if you're not comfortable trying them at higher stakes, just try them at lower stakes. Try as much lines, as much things as possible, or try to think about them. If you don't want, like, if you're good in theory, you can just sit down, talk with people, post on forums and stuff about some ideas that you can discover. Okay, could I take this line with this end? I don't have any specific example, but you get the whole point of like trying some new stuff, trying to get some thin value, trying to get some making some bigger bluffs, trying to turn hands into bluffs and stuff basically that good people do, great players do. And if you start approaching that by being by fearing that every new thing that you try is going to might be wrong, basically, you're never gonna get better ever, because even if it works, you're not even sure that it was good and stuff like that. You have to go out there, don't leave anything on the table, just try as hard as you can, basically at getting better about every single league that you might have noticed in your game. And from now on, not from now on, but from that point, take every single I'm gonna get it. Sorry, it's a pretty long video and I've talked a lot. Uh, just a second. Every single new thing that you try, basically, and assume that it is right until proven otherwise, basically. Assume that what you are trying is good if you put enough time into thinking about it, and but don't be stubborn about it. Don't like, okay, this is right, and even if it hasn't worked the last 10 times, even if like 5-bet bluffing my old stack hasn't worked the last 10 times, I've thought about it, and I think it is mathematically very good. You have to still be very honest, and you have to realize when something is working and when something is not working. But as soon as you think about trying something with some fear in your heart, basically, uh, you will get nowhere. And I had something else to say about that, but I'm kind of losing my ideas. I mean, think a bit more about it. Sorry about that. I'm kind of getting tired here. Just a second. Because at the very base, actually, I'm thinking back on what I was talking about, and I was talking about adaptation to other players' mistakes. And when you think that you found a mistake into an opponent's game, basically try it. And where I was getting at with that is that exploiting mistakes are going to create unbalances in your ranges most of the time. But there is absolutely no problem with being not balanced if nobody is exploiting that. And if you approach the whole process of trying to get balance by thinking, okay, I shouldn't get too unbalanced because people are going to exploit me right off the bat, you are never ever going to be able to adapt to people. People are so closed, like their minds are so closed about, okay, I have to absolutely be balanced in every single spot, uh, that they often don't even try new moves on some players that will never even think about exploiting those new moves that, let's say, you only make as a bluff. As an example to that, it's going to be a pretty basic example, but I think it's going to be a lot clearer in your head what I'm trying to talk about, is that when you concentrate a lot more on what the other player's mistakes are and not what you could do wrong at the tables and then fearing that you're going to get exploited, you are going to you are going to actually discover some stuff against a player. Let's say you discover that with, like, looking back at statistics and stuff like that, you discover that one of your opponents not never, but just almost never calls a big bet on the river without having the nuts, basically. And you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to use that, but not too much because he is going to pick up on the fact that I'm bluffing on the river every single time. But the truth is, it is tough for someone to realize that they're getting exploited. And if you find any sort of exploitable thing in your opponent's play, you absolutely need to try and exploit it to its maximum until proven otherwise. This is pretty much where I was trying to get at. And coming back on the example of, let's say, someone is folding too much on the river, there is a very decent chance as you experiment stuff that the guy will fold like 50 times in a row to your river bluffs and will never even know that you're bluffing more on the river. They just never call, so they will assume that you have it and don't call, and you definitely feel like you are not balanced, but that is no big deal. because you don't need to be balanced because they're not even thinking about exploiting it. So this is pretty much what I was trying to say. What I was toughly trying to say, basically. But you have to approach the whole process of getting better and adapting to people by being a step ahead of your opponent every single time. Every single reg that you play a lot against have weaknesses. Unless you play against Phil Galfin and Jungle Man and Dur every single day and Nuts and or whatever. Unless you're playing in those games every single day, every single player you play against has a lot of leaks. And I do myself have leaks. And I know I am exploitable in some areas. And I know people, if I'm not playing my A plus game, are exploiting me. The very best players I'm playing against are exploiting me in some areas because I'm not perfectly playing every single hand. And I'm unbalanced in some stuff. I've worked on that a lot recently. But when you approach it that way, basically your mindset needs to be that everyone sucks. It's kind of drastic, but as soon as you realize that you don't fear anyone and everyone sucks and people don't adjust as fast as you think, especially at lower stakes, let's say you're playing anything lower than 10-20 basically, or 5-10, assume that people are bad at adapting, because if they would be good at adapting, they would be at higher stakes. It's as simple as that. It's the big difference between a good and a bad player. So if you get good at that, you will get better than most people. And it's being able not only to have two different games from fishes to regulars, but being able to have so many different games from player to player and having so many different lines from one player to another. You know that you discover by trying a lot of bluffs in some spots that someone, when you represent the set by check raising flop and betting turn and shoving river, the guy will pretty much always fold anything but the nuts. Well, you can use that more than you think. This is the bottom line. As soon as you discover something, and you have to put efforts into discovering any people's leaks or general tendencies or stuff that they don't do. Are they folding too much my raises on the flop? Are they doing that kind of stuff? It needs work to find, and when you find it, it needs work to exploit it, and you need to put away any fear that you might have that of not being balanced, basically, and of like being exploited or whatever, because all of those fears are gonna restrain you from playing perfectly and from adapting perfectly. So adapt until proven otherwise. And I'm going to come back on that. I have one interesting spot for the first time in ages. I'm debating between checking and betting, but I know GMC is pretty aggressive. And if I check here, the fact is, if I bet here in 4 people, I just look way too strong. And there is no way I am ever going to get anyone's stack in if they don't have a king by the river, basically. This is as simple as that. And if I check, there is a good chance that if the turn breaks and then I bet, I don't know that much again about Alexander's game, but I think there is a chance that GMC sometimes will try to fire the flop as bluff. And there's a chance that this guy might like check raise me and try to represent a king from time to time, because I kind of remove all of the kings from my range by checking the flop, basically. And if anyone has a king, chances are I'm gonna get their whole stack in no matter what. So I really think checking the flop here is better. Just because basically I look too strong by betting. I look way too strong. People are going to 10 on that board to make a lot of euro calls. And I mean, I might lose some value against the fish, but even the fish, I mean, I don't have any more info on him. If I had proof that he was total dumbass who is just going to give me a stack with like a pair of fives here, this is definitely a flop bet. But the fact is, he is only 50 big blinds deep, and even if I check the flop, there's still a good chance that like if he has a middle pair and the break turns, I will get his whole stack in, and sometimes he's gonna try a dumb bluff or something like that. I think most players will bet that flop with my hand like close to 100%, but I think this is definitely a mistake, and I think checking here will make you a lot tougher to play against, will induce a lot of bluffs from players. If you're against a guy who is able to pull the big bluff, if you're playing against me, check that flop basically, 4-way. I'm fucked. I'm gonna try to bluff you every single time. Um, and you will get some random bluffs. You don't lose any value because, like I said, you rarely have three streets of value if the other guys don't have the nuts, basically, against any of the regulars, and you don't lose any value from the fish because if he has a middle pair most of the time, he's going to call turn and river once you check the flop anyways. So I definitely think checking is good here. And because of the exact situation, of the fact that we were four and stuff, was the best option. And analyzing all those things is something else that is good, and that is obviously a big part of getting better and what differentiates a very good player from a mediocre player. But I think adapting to your opponents is even bigger than that. Whoops. Oops. 6, 6, 6. And I feel like I've been repeating the same stuff over and over again, and I'm kind of losing my ideas. So I'm gonna come back on the action a bit more and come back on my ideas later. I hope it is at least kind of clear what I am trying to say, trying to talk about basically, of the whole stepping up your game process, the fact that you need to tell yourself that you're better than everyone else because you're putting more effort and you're more brilliant and you are exploiting stuff that they are themselves not even thinking about exploiting. But you also need to, here kind of deepish, I'm really not sure this is profitable. He's still 3-betting 10% and 13 from the blinds, so I do think I can defend that. He's 3-betting more than I thought he was. So yeah, I do think with that neatness, even though it's a pretty big 3-bet, I can defend that. And see what happens at almost 150 big blinds deep. I don't expect him to play perfectly post flop. Basically, I haven't seen him at higher stakes very often. It definitely looks like a very tough decision. Let's hope he times out and I bet minimum. C bets. This is of course a call. I could raise here, but there are so many draws. I think if he has a draw himself, I just make it so much easier for him to play the hand, and I'm cutting on my options. And if he doesn't have a draw, but the draw gets there, there are a lot of draws that could get there that would give me basically the best hand. Not the best hand, but would give me a very good bluff opportunity. So raising is kind of fine here, but I much prefer calling, and I am definitely going to bet here. This is a perfect example of a spot where I have way too many draws in my range, and if I'm playing against someone very, very good, they are going to not even fold ace-high on the turn because like I have way too many gut shots, flush draws, all of those stuff. This is definitely a shove. I don't think there's any merit in doing anything but a shove. I'm kind of scared of him having queens actually, with all the timing and stuff, but I still think I have to shove with the flush getting there. and I thought he would fold that on the river, and that sucks. I kind of hate myself for that. But coming back on the turn decision, it was a perfect example of, like I said, a spot where I'm definitely not balanced. I expected him. I don't have a lot of info on that guy's game basically, but I expected him to be just shut downing here most of the time. Not most of the time, but pretty often on the turn. And like I said, I have way too many draws in my range, and this is a spot where if I bet the turn, most people are going to call with ace high, definitely. Pretty often, just because of all the gut shots and all this stuff. But I feel like I don't mind not being balanced here on the turn because I feel like all of his ace high are definitely going to fold. And most players at these stakes, I don't know about that exact player, but I'm gonna assume, since I don't have that much of a read on him, that he is playing that way and that he's not assuming that I'm bluffing that much. I am going to assume that if he has ace high or nothing at all, most of the time he's just going to check fold the turn. So a turn bet here is profitable. It wouldn't be a profitable, I think, against someone who is playing perfectly, but I don't expect him to be playing perfectly. So I think a turn bet is profitable, and I decided to go for that, try to present a queen and stuff like that. And I definitely was going to give up if the river breaks. I think when he checks the turn bet in itself is definitely profitable in my head. For me not to have to barrel on the river, but when the river is the king of clubs, I think it completes too many stuff. I can very well represent king queen, and I can very well represent clubs. Unfortunately, he ended up being a pretty good end reader. I thought he would fold that that kind of hand. I felt like he had that kind of hand, something like jacks, two or tens, pretty often. Sorry. And I thought he would fold those almost always with clubs getting there, but I was wrong on that. So when I do that against someone that I don't have any reads on, I definitely take a big mental note on that, on the fact that he's not scared to call down his stack, and the fact that he probably thinks I'm playing super aggressive, and the fact that he's likely to induce here with those type of hands, and he's probably a good reader of the board and the possible draws that I could have with him calling, even if the clubs are getting there here on the river. So props to him for making that call. I didn't think he would make that kind of call on the river. That's why I think the turn bet is profitable against pretty much everyone, no matter what. And I was planning on giving up the river, but the river gave me an opportunity basically to bluff, and I tried to take it, and I thought he would fold that. But props to him for making the correct call. Here I call. I'm not gonna bet that. I've bet pretty much every single time he's checked to me. I think this is kind of border where he's gonna check. He's gonna bet most of his air and check something like a 10 pretty often, or a weak king, especially against me, a player who is going to bet when checked to very often. Basically, I think he's going to try and exploit that. I still have that missed bluff on the heart kind of bit, but no big deal. I don't think I've played the end really bad. I just was a bit off. I mean, if he's not folding that on the river, my river bluff is a total disaster. With the info that I had on him, I thought he was going to fold that. My problem was not with my actual play here. It was with my infos, basically. It basically was with the way I thought he would handle the situation, and my play was good, but my read was off, and it was definitely a mistake. But I think it was a tough mistake to avoid, given that I didn't have that much info on my opponent here. But I don't mind the mistake that much. Easy 4-bet get in here, even with the position. It's only 100 big blinds deep. So, perfect example of a spot where I thought I did not have to be balanced because I kind of underestimated my opponent. but I don't mind missing those bluffs from time to time as long as you learn from your mistakes. And when you try to get better, and when you try those kind of bluffs and those kind of plays, you are going to miss those kind of plays. But you definitely, when you miss and when you make what not, I wouldn't call that a mistake. I would call that a misread, basically. And when you do that kind of misread, you definitely want to be able to take mental notes and want to be able to not repeat your mistakes over and over again. Not repeating mistakes is a very, very big, another very big difference, I think, between good and great players. The great players are not going to make the same mistakes over and over again. Here he's raised under again. I don't think I have any value on the river. I don't think he's calling with like a worse ace pretty much ever. If I bet big on the river, I definitely was thinking about maybe check raising the river as a bluff from time to time. I think he's going to fold pretty much all of his range. Could have king queen with a heart, which he's not folding, so it might not be that good. But I just think as a whole, if I'm betting here, I'm over-representing my hands just because of the pre-flop positions. Not just because of that, but I wanted to play that. But in big part because of that, I think I'm over-representing by betting the river, and I think by checking, I think betting, I'm just gonna value bet myself pretty much every single, like way too often against ace jack or ace king, for the times that he's going to call with a worse hand, basically, which are not that often. If I check, checks back, I have the best hand, so no big deal. It's kind of a situation where I'm going to have the best hand a lot, but it doesn't mean that I have to value bet, absolutely. But yeah, coming back on not making the same mistakes over and over again, if you try to step up your game and try to get better, but you don't learn from your mistakes, it's a big waste of time. Very, very big waste of time. You have to be so honest and so, once again, modest, and don't put your ego in the way, and you have to do those things to be able not to repeat your mistakes. And my missed bluff is a very good example of that, because I think a lot of players, and I think this is going to be an attitude of, it wasn't on that table, but yeah, you remember the hand anyways. I think a lot of mid-stakes bad players who are struggling to move up are going to have an attitude here of berating the other player for the call here, because I still feel like my play is good. I still feel like I'm getting enough fault on the river, and I think a lot of players, I see a lot of players here going berserk of like, oh shit, why did he call that? What a fucking dung. Motherfucker, I'm going to make that bluff over and over again. I don't mind, that was a good bluff. You should have folded that with the clubs getting there, of course. What a dumbass, etc., etc. But if you approach those situations that way, you're never ever gonna learn anything, and you might as well stop playing right away. You have to be honest of thinking, okay, was my play good? I think my answer here, I can very well admit when I'm wrong, but here my answer, I think, is yes. I think my play was good, given the info that I had. Why didn't it work? Here is that it didn't work because my info was wrong, basically. Not my play, but my info was wrong. And what can I learn from that? I can learn that this guy is probably a bit better than I thought he was. On that board, to take that line and to play his hand that way against me is pretty much a perfect way to play this hand against me, knowing that I'm very aggressive. And when I realized that, okay, this guy might be better than I gave him credit for, what can I learn from that missed bluff? Well, I can learn that this guy is pretty good, and he can end read pretty well, and that I'm going to try to exploit him in a different way than what I was thinking about in the beginning, basically. And I can learn all that just by being able to just from basically being honest about what really happened in the end and not telling myself, okay, why the fuck did he call that? What a dunk, etc., etc. Here, you check pretty quick, and it's like under the gun against cutoff, so my range is a lot stronger than in the blind confrontation that we had just ago that I didn't decide to bet the flop with my air. Here, I think betting the flop with air is definitely the way to go just because of the positions and the fact that he checked pretty quick and that he's not likely to check big hand, or he's not likely to call a lot of streets with a medium string hands, not as likely as in the other blind confrontation that we just had. So yeah, that's basically the way to approach something that failed, something that you might have tried at when trying to step up in your game. You tried that kind of bluff, it fails. You go through the process that I've just gone through. Why didn't it work? What was my mistake, if any? What can I learn from that? How am I going to adapt to that in the future? And the better you are at finding the right answers to those questions, the better you are going to become as a player, the faster you are going to become a good player, basically. This is just as simple as that. And this is another big skill that is really important for most players. Another big non-poker skill that is really important, being able to set your ego aside, basically, and be honest about what happened and learning from that. If I forgot to talk about something, I am going to never get it back anyways. I'm going to play like another 5-10 minutes. I don't think part 2 was quite as good as part 1, unfortunately. I think I kind of rambled quite a bit and I've lost my thoughts in a couple of spots. Sorry about that. No excuse there, but I hope you get my general point, and I'm actually glad I missed that bluff because it made me think of something really, really important, the whole process of trying to step up your game, of learning from your mistakes, basically. This is just so important that I wanted to talk about that, and I've gone over it already. So I missed a bluff, yes, but I've got a read on the guy, basically, on his whole thinking process about poker. Basically, I've got a pretty good read on that, right? Only by watching that one hand and only by missing that one bluff. So I did miss the bluff, but if I'm able to use my newfound info, if I'm playing against that guy day in and day out every single day, and I'm able to use my newfound info and adapt as quickly as possible to the info that I just found, the bluff in the end might end up not even being a mistake, because he's likely to think in a way about my general play for a while, and I'm going to switch right away because I've learned something from this hand, but he probably did not learn anything. I mean, if he played this and that way, it's probably because he thought that I was in general playing too aggressively and I was going to bluff too much in that spot, and he was right. But if I adapt right away just by learning from that one hand, he is going to make a lot of mistakes in the near future because he's still going to assume that I'm playing a certain way while I'm going in totally another directions, and being able to switch gears and adapt and having multiple gears in your arsenal and in your general playing style basically is really important for one thing to be able to use the info that you can find basically and acquire from stuff that happened. Yeah, I could check call once, but I just okay with him calling. I think anything but folding. Sucks, Jesus. Anything but folding is definitely a mistake here. I'm just like, if I check raise, there are way too many draws out there, and I could like check. I cannot check raise and call this shove. It's just dumb, and I cannot like check raise and fold to a shove either because they're shoving so many draws that I'm almost committed. If I'm check calling, I'm pretty much never ever winning pot after the hand. And this would be true if I had, like, I don't know, Jack 8 suited in hearts. Let's say that I would play that way. I think the flop is going to be a fold very often. Jack 8 is a pretty good example, but more often than people think, because if every single option sucks, basically, this is definitely, I think, the kind of situation where the kind of board being out of position is going to play a lot in that, but kind of situation in general where people are going to call one street too often just to give up. That's more general poker thing, but people, I think, like I said, are calling one street and hoping that their end is good way too often in that kind of situation, without realizing that they're not going to win the hand that often, basically, even if their end is good on the flop, which might not even be. So this is a very good example of a spot where even like Queen Jack of suit, I think, might be a fold right away on the flop being out of position, because even if you call, every single option is going to flop on later streets. So yeah, on that board, those positions, 3-1 on the flop, that flop, and having that guy in the hand and having that drawy of a board that I cannot like turn a hand into a bluff because there are just so many draws and we're not deep enough so that I really scare them or whatever, that are just going to shove over my bet without thinking twice about it, because it would be their only way to play the hand. That I think, like I said, doing anything but folding, even like Jack Queen of suit here, would be a mistake, definitely. Here I decided not to c-bet because I think there are a lot of those cards in their blinds defending range, and I don't want to like bet once and then give up because they're not folding a queen, but I don't want to bet 2 times and 3 times because they're not even folding a king. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation betting the flop. I just thought that I can check back the flop, and then if they check again on the turn, I can very well bet the turn and represent a weak king or ace queen still, and get away with a delayed c-bet pretty often there. I think I'm gonna stop basically the 2 parts series right here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I did not lose you too much in word explanations. If you have any questions, any comments, if you really start trying to work on your game and work on your actual stepping up your game process, and you have any questions, feel free to ask, feel free to come on me and ask questions on the forums or whatever, and I will be able to answer that. I'm going to leave you with that hand. It might be a bit minus EV to defend that, but we're in a video and I won spots. Last time I did that, it did cost me like $800. I hope it's not going to cost me $600 that time. It's not that big of a mistake to defend pre-flop, if it is one, but I do want a good spot to leave you on. Here, way too many draws on the flop. I think he might check raise a draw. I think he's definitely betting pretty much every single time if he has better than me. And I think I have a aggressive enough image that I can get paid by worse for at least a couple of streets here. So flop, I think, is a mandatory bet and then call whatever happens after. And I did win that pot, so it's cool. I have a satanic stack size that I'm gonna leave you on. So, so long, suckers.